Pedro from A&P-Reacts. I'm here today with Conor of Conjurer to talk about the upcoming new record, Páthos, out July 1st on Nuclear Blast. I probably mispronounced the name of the album, but I'm sure you're going to help me out with that.
Oh no, you smashed it. Good job.
Oh, I did? All right,
Yeah,
finally. Finally. I've been known to butcher a name here and there. So,
got
so
it. No,
how you
not
doing?
this time. I'm good, thank you, dude. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. So let's talk about this record and perhaps from the starting point. Did you guys have a goal, a desire in terms of what you wanted to achieve, not just with the album in general, but with the sound on the album?
Kind of yes and no. We didn't set out and be like, oh, we want to write an album and it has to sound like this or anything like that. We didn't want to kind of put those parameters on it. The only goal that we really had is that we wanted to make sure that it was like a worthwhile follow-up to the debut and that sort of thing. Like we wanted to take everything that we'd done and like push it further and like make sure that these were better songs in kind of like every way. But other than that, it was very much just we're gonna get together, we're gonna write the songs that we're gonna write, and then we'll just keep going at it until we're happy with it, essentially. But there wasn't any particular mission statement like this has to be the heaviest or this has to be the fastest or anything like that. It was just we just want to push everything that we've done like a little bit further. We want to try new stuff. We want to experiment and just see what comes out of it, essentially.
You mentioned the debut album, so I have to ask you this. What do you see as the biggest growth from that record into this album?
To be honest, the biggest thing that I found really is I think the songs are just a bit more like cohesive, because there's a lot on the album, like there's a lot of material and actual like content there, and we've like tend to find ourselves like flipping between styles, and like there's bits that are like more doom metal and death metal and kind of sludge and post metal, all that sort of stuff. But I think the way we've been able to tie those things together and like make it seamless so that it's not just, oh, here's a heavy bit and like then here's a quiet bit or anything like that. Like it all flows a lot more naturally, I think, in these songs and on this album, both like within the songs themselves or then from song to song on the album, so that the whole thing is like one consistent kind of piece. I think that's the main thing that we've kind of grown with and gotten a lot better at this time around.
Outside of the growth, what did you learn in terms of the recording process and maybe even from a creative perspective with that debut album that you feel was instrumental in making this record the record that it is?
It's tricky just because this one ended up being so different because of the pandemic. It was a lot of what we thought we would have learned ended up kind of getting thrown out the window. Like we were ready, we were going to fly and record it with Will Putney over in America, and like we would have been our second time in a studio properly, so we had all that experience. But then with the pandemic kind of shutting everything down, it was a little bit almost like we were back to square one, to be honest. Like we ended up having to record it a lot of it ourselves, sorry, which we've never had to really do before. Like we record demos and stuff at home, but it's different to when you're actually in the studio trying to get the album as it should be and all that sort of stuff. So there was, there's still some experience we could draw on in terms of like trying to be professional and make sure we're well practiced, and so we're not wasting time in the studio or anything like that. But it would have been nice to be able to draw on that a little bit more and it not be such a stressful and like crazy experience being in the middle of the lockdown trying to record an album rather than in a nice fancy studio.
So the lockdown and the pandemic had an impact on the recording process. Did it have an impact on the creative process?
Yes and no. To be honest, if anything, it was probably more positive on the creative side, just because we're very bad at writing. Essentially, like we're not an album who can write when we're on the road or anything like that. We all write at home, like individually, and then send it to each other and kind of build it up over the internet. So, if anything, like being legally locked in our homes was probably a good thing to like help us focus and really like get the album done, because it had taken us so long to get to that point, because we were just kept getting like tour after and like being able to play really cool festivals and just stuff we didn't want to turn down, which is obviously a wonderful problem to have, but when you're trying to write an album, it's not ideal. So yeah, in terms of the creative side of it, not that the pandemic was a good thing for anyone, but in terms of getting the album written, it really helped us because it meant we could focus just on that and like just on the songwriting and like get it done essentially.
You mentioned earlier of how much things or how many elements there are in the Conjurer sound when you bring it all together. Is that a challenge for you guys to find the right balance for those elements in order to get to that Conjurer sound that people are expecting now from this new record?
Yeah, definitely. Like it's what takes the most time essentially. It's like what we spend the most time arguing over, like going over the tiny, like there's been multiple times over the years where we've been arguing about literally one note and whether this note should be that note or that note or anything like that. That's the level we kind of find ourselves going to, but it's also then on the flip side what we think makes it like good essentially. And that's kind of what we've always said is like, if the four of us are happy with it, then hopefully that means it's good. But with four different people with different ideas and different influences, and so going into those details and arguing over those tiny little bits here and there is the bit that is the most challenging in terms of then coming out with a full cohesive song. But hopefully means that when we do, then it's in theory like bulletproof, right? If we've made sure to shore up every little bit, then you should be able to come at it from any angle or like drop into the song at any point and it'd be interesting, like there'd be something cool going on.
So are you guys four perfectionists then?
Pretty much, yeah. There's always a few like moments here and there where like you're never going to make everybody happy and all that sort of stuff, but for the most part we're all very like dedicated to getting stuff right. Like I can't really think of any times where we've been like, yeah, that'll do. It's like, well, no, that's not good enough. Like we need to make it good because I can't live with it if I have to just go, yeah, it's fine.
It's funny that you mentioned this because listening to the album and to the genre that you guys, I mean, you guys are bringing different genres together, but that creates your own unique sound, your own unique experience. The album is so thick. It has like so many layers. There's so much to digest. Now, you guys did a wonderful job creating little nuances here and there that allow you as a listener to kind of like take a breath in and say, okay, now this part here, I can relax a little bit before I have to dig deeper into what it is there to digest. So as a listener, I'm going down into the weeds when I'm listening to you guys. And considering how perfectionist you guys are, I can only imagine how deep into the weeds you guys get when you're putting these songs together.
Yeah, that like that's exactly it. And say those are the tiny little details that we argue over. But the point is that, yeah, by the time it reaches you and you're listening to it, sure, there's a lot going on, but it's in a way that like makes sense and like is natural, and you can listen to the song and you're not there like constantly being confused by like what is all this stuff. Like we'll basically do all the hard work and have all the headaches so that by the time we put it out to people, it's yeah, there's a lot going on and it's hopefully interesting and there's kind of stuff in there for everyone, but it's in a package in a way that, yeah, like you say, sounds unique and interesting, but also in a way that makes sense.
One of the elements that I thought was really interesting within your sound is that you guys take sludge elements, but you don't necessarily give it the traditional sludge spin. Like the sound itself is very well defined. You can see the parameters of what you guys are trying to do with the songs, like where it starts, where the middle, the ending, everything comes together really in a clear, concise manner. So when you're introducing sludge elements into that sound, how do you redefine or how do you fix all the imperfections that comes from that specific genre that you don't necessarily want within your album and within your sound experience?
Yeah, it's tricky. Like it's one of those things where we don't sit down and we're not specifically going, okay, well, what do we like and not like about these specific genres? Like we don't write necessarily, obviously we know that we're a metal band and we're going to be writing metal songs, but we don't write with genre in mind in the way that we don't get to a point in a song and go, oh, okay, this needs a sludge part now or anything like that. It's more just that these things happen to come out naturally. Like, because this is what we're influenced by, like there's always going to be elements of all these different things like sludge or like death metal or like post kind of metal and rock or anything like that. But I think it's just because it's then coming, it's just because we're doing it and we have our own experience with it, if that makes sense. So the way we write sludge metal is going to be completely different to a way that X band over here writes sludge, and it just happens to be that the songs we like and the songs that we're writing and the other elements we bring in to work with sludge happens to mean that we just take a different spin on it. Because you're right, I think if we wrote a part that was like sludge has always been, like kind of how everybody knows sludge, it might struggle to then mix with the next section or anything like that. And so I think it's all a culmination where, just because of the way we are trying to work in all these different influences, it means that because they have to work together and not just separately, it changes how they kind of look and how they sound and how they feel by the time that they're done.
That's a really good explanation for a very complex problem to have.
Yeah.
When it comes to the bass parts on an album like this, do you work on it beforehand in terms of, this album, I want to push myself to do something different, or I want to push myself to try something different? Because it's also part of your own personal growth, not just the growth of the band. Do you do that, or do you allow the process to be more organic?
It's kind of a mix of both. So this one for me, so I joined the band just as they finished recording the debut album. And so we've been friends kind of way before that. Like, I helped them record their initial demos when they first formed. So I've always been friends, been around the band and the songs and all of that. But I wasn't actually in the band until after. And so part of that journey and that growth was like, okay, now I finally get to put my own stamp on it. So what do I want to do? But I think it's one of those things where it kind of has to be organic, because the way we write in general, although we do go in and like argue, like I said, about those fine details, it is still stuff that comes to us like hopefully naturally. So I'm not looking to like fight the songs, if that makes sense, just to get a cool bass bit in or something like that. It's kind of whatever the song needs. And so there are some of the more open sections where the bass is able to kind of not follow the guitars and do its own thing a little bit. And to be honest, a lot of the bass parts initially, because if someone writes a part, we typically will write all the instruments for that part just so we can hear it properly more than anything. So if I'm writing a riff, I'll probably write bass and drums and guitars for it, even if that's then not the final drums that are going to be played, for example. But a lot of the bass parts on this have come from Jan, our drummer, and it just happened to be that like he wrote a really cool bass part. So there might be a note I change here or there. If there's a bit like, oh, okay, maybe I'll change that bit. But kind of like I was saying before, like I'm not looking to fight it just to have my ideas on every song, if that makes sense. So it's trying to be as organic as possible and ultimately serve the song while still, trying to develop myself and like have parts on there so I can listen to it and go, that's me, like that's what I do, that's what I want to hear from my bass playing and all that sort of stuff.
One of the songs on this album that left a lasting impression with me was Those Years Condemned.
Okay, cool.
Tell me a little bit about that song, because I think it's such an interesting track within the concept of the album, and it's such a very, like, it feels to me like it's so emotionally driven and dripped. What is the story behind that track?
Sure. So that was the one song that we kind of had before we really started writing. It was the first one that really kind of came together, and it wasn't left over from the first album, but it was the only one that was really written in the gap between the two. So we obviously had the first album come out, and then we had the pandemic where we started writing this one, and that one kind of fit in the middle. And initially it was also going to be the album opener, just because of the way it builds up. But then by the time we then finished writing it, that just made a little more sense. But no, that song is kind of one of the earlier ones we had, and was kind of what led us in the direction of what we wanted the album to be. It's one of my favorites still as well. Like, I was, to be honest, the last person that needed convincing that it shouldn't be the album opener, and then maybe the first single, stuff like that, because I thought it was such a strong song and such a strong start in the way that it builds up, like from that first single guitar, and then all the instruments kind of come in one by one before the whole thing explodes. But yeah, that's kind of what that song is. It's sort of essentially the song that started it all. Like it's ended up in the middle of the album, and I think it's a really interesting reintroduction just because of the way that the song before it, Basilisk, ends. It's kind of like a really clear halfway point. Like you were saying, like take a breather and like move on to the next thing. But yeah, in terms of just as a song and how it came about, it was one of the first, and like kind of what sent us on the journey, so to speak, to be like, okay, cool, this is the sort of thing we want to do. This is how the songs are going to turn out and how they're going to sound.
Unlike me, you're a young man, so you don't have any gray hairs. But is there a song on this record that gave you perhaps some?
The trickiest one was Rot, track 2. That was the one that it was never, I don't think it was ever in doubt of like, it was always going to be on the album, just because we're not a band who like writes 20 songs and then picks. Like the 8 songs that are on the album are the 8 songs that we wrote. But it was the one that like, yeah, took us the longest to get to that finalized version. It was, yeah, we spent a lot of time going over and over and over that in like terms of like arrangement and like dropping different parts in and out and just trying to get it to a point where we felt it actually worked as a cohesive song, because it was one that kind of like I was saying before, just felt like it was a lot of different bits. And we knew we had this riff and we knew we had the end riff, but like actually getting there and like joining it all together was painful at times. So yeah, that was the one that I think took a few years off all our lives. And we had our friend there basically like recording it, because I think we're going to do like a mini like documentary type series. And there is a good like 3 hours of footage of us all just sat in a room, like with the laptop playing it over and over and just like ready to bang our heads against the walls, essentially. Like there's our drummer very clearly being like, this is my least favorite Conjurer song that we've ever done. And that sort of thing. So yeah, Rot was the tricky one, but we got there in the end, I'd like to think.
It's interesting because he made it as one of the singles. I mean, so
yeah.
So all the work, all the trouble that got you there, it paid off.
Absolutely, yeah. Rot was, to be honest, it was a strange one. I don't think it was ever really intended to be a single. Rot's whole thing was trying to focus on writing a song that was deliberately like just focused on the heavy and like disgusting side. Like we want to write a song that is just that, essentially, like, because kind of, as you know, because you've heard, like we've got songs like Those Years Condemns that go through all the different emotions, and like there's heavy bits and there's quiet bits and there's this and that. The idea for Rot was just to be like heavy and like disgusting, which yeah, normally doesn't, unless you're a band that sounds like that all the time, doesn't sound like a good idea for a single. But it was kind of one of those that was like, by the time we figured out what we wanted to singles to be, it made perfect sense, because we did It Dwells was the first single, which we thought was like a good, well-rounded first single to be like, we're back, here's what the band sounds like, here's kind of what you can expect from the album. It's got all the different elements in there, but it's also familiar to if you've like known the first album and all that sort of stuff. And then the idea was like, cool, then we're going to give you Rot and we're going to give you Cracks in the Pyre. And like those are the two like ends of the spectrum in terms of the album. You've got the most disgusting thing, and then you've got the kind of like nicest, most clean, like pretty thing. And then obviously when people hear the album, they can fill in all the gaps between. But yeah, it's a strange choice for a single, but luckily it's gone quite well.
One last question for you. Is this album already, I know it's the second record, but is this album a full representation of who the band are, or are you guys still kind of discovering who you can become?
Yeah, I think it's kind of both, to be honest. I think it's definitely a full representation, sorry, of who we are now and like who we've become over the 4 years since the debut. But we had like, it's one of those things, we have no idea about the future. It's not, we don't have songs already written for album 3 or anything like that. It's very much, yeah, it's kind of like a time capsule in that moment, where obviously we hope it doesn't end up dated and it just sounds like 2022 or anything like that. But it's very much kind of like a stick in the ground of like, okay, this is who we are now. This is who our influences are. This is the songs we wanted to write. And then we'll see going forward. We definitely don't want to be the band that just writes the same album again. And like I say, that was kind of the only really goal we had for this, that we wanted it to be different and better than Maya and like pushing things further. But in terms of what we want to do after this, we have no idea. It's one of those things where we could get to album 3 and it's the same thing. And like we've just tried to push everything even further and like it's even more dense and thick. Or we could get to it next time and go, okay, that was a little bit much. That was a nightmare to play live. Let's try just focusing on this or that. Like, honestly, have no idea. It's one of those things where I think we're really proud of it and it's who we are at the moment. But in terms of what we want to do going forward, we're just going to figure it out as it comes.
Fair enough. I mean, it's always an evolving process for any band. Well, Conor, thank you very much for your time today, man. All the best of luck with this release on July 1st on Nuclear Blast. Páthos, Conjurer, don't miss it. Don't sleep on it. Go pick it up. Pre-order, do whatever it is that you have to do and support these guys. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, dude. I appreciate it.
Take care, man. Bye.
Thanks. See ya.